Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to the Hal Lindsey Report. You know, I've quoted an old axiom many times, but it still bears repeating, especially in our day. History teaches us that man learns nothing from history. It's my prayer that tonight, in this show, you'll see how that's very true. And I pray that this show will help Americans to learn from history. When God called Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees to the land that God would show him, he gave him two specific promises. God would make of him a great nation, and he would provide the land to support that nation. In Genesis 12, verse 12, God said to Abraham, I will bless them that bless you, and curse him that curses you. And in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. The Lord keeps his promises. World history testifies to that truth. The fates of nations and empires were tied to their historical treatment of the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The empire that persecuted the Jews did so at its peril. From Babylon to Rome, the fortunes of kingdoms paralleled the fortunes of the Jews within their midst. One can track the rise and fall of medieval empires and kingdoms through to the modern era and see the same principle played out time and time again. In 1492, at the peak of their power and prestige, the Spanish expelled the Jews. The exiles moved to England, and in 1588, the British sank the mighty Spanish Armada in the English Channel. The British Empire then ruled the world for the next 300 years, until it double-crossed the Jews in 1923. It gave away most of the Balfour Declaration's lands grant to the Jews in order to make new Arab states out of the former Ottoman Empire. During the 20-year British Mandate period, as the Brits restricted Jewish immigration to the Holy Land and left them exposed to Hitler's savagery, their entire empire collapsed. By the time Israel declared independence in 1948, the British Empire essentially no longer existed. America was founded on the principle that the God of the Bible is the grantor and guarantor of our religious freedom. The first patriot to fall in Georgia during the Revolution was Francis Salvador, a Jew. Every adult Jew in Charleston, South Carolina signed up to fight for freedom. It was the Jewish financier Chaim Salomon who loaned the Continental Congress $200,000 of his own money to see them through the last days of the war. Salomon was never repaid. He died bankrupt. When the first Jewish synagogue in Rhode Island opened in 1790, President George Washington sent a letter of congratulations. In it he wrote, May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in the land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit safely under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. America's fortunes were tied to the treatment of the Jews in their midst, and as a result, America grew and prospered. In 1948, the United States was the first nation to recognize the new Jewish state of Israel. It supported Israel throughout the 1950s and the 1960s. As America blessed Israel, God blessed America. However, following the Yom Kippur War in 1973, the United States began pressuring Israel to surrender lands it captured while defending itself from Muslim invasions in 1967 and 1973. Strangely, U.S. fortunes began to turn. The Vietnam War divided the nation and ended in our retreat. The OPEC crisis, nagging energy shortages, and double-digit inflation continued throughout the decade. But in 1982, President Ronald Reagan reversed U.S. policy toward Israel. He opposed the creation of a Palestinian state or the division of Jerusalem. Coincidentally, the nation's fortunes rebounded. 10 years later, flushed from victory in the Gulf War, America became the world's lone, undisputed superpower. But in September 1993, in a Rose Garden ceremony, Bill Clinton sponsored the signing of the Oslo Accords. As I knew it would, this has become a curse to Israel. It's because the Palestinians and Arabs do not want peace. They want Israel destroyed. The United States and the West virtually forced Israel to trade the land of God's promise for man's promise of peace. By decade's end, with America's help, Israel was again pushed back behind the green line, pinned in on all sides. Once again, the fate of Jerusalem hung in the balance. And once again, U.S. fortunes went into free fall. Hello. Is anyone paying attention here? Many will be quick to say that these events are coincidental and unrelated. Maybe so. But how many unrelated coincidences does it take to qualify as a pattern? And besides, with God, the creator of the world, there's no such thing as a coincidence. He orchestrates them all behind the scenes. Following the events of 9/11 and fearful of further antagonizing Muslim terrorists, the United States quietly began withdrawing its support for Israel's claim to Jerusalem. In fact, it began to actively endorse and press for the so-called two-state solution. But the harder the U.S. tried to push Israel out of Jerusalem, the more entangled the war on terror became. Finally, in 2007, the string broke and the economy imploded following a series of financial collapses. Even now, President Obama continues to move America away from Israel, much to the alarm of many within his own party. He has also made it abundantly clear that he will brook no interference from the Israelis in his plan to impose peace in the region. The administration has gone on record tying America's continued support for Israel to Israel's agreement to divide Jerusalem. The American administration has even forbidden Israel to build Jewish homes in Jerusalem, Jewish Quarter, and in other parts of the city, completely unrelated to Palestinian claims. Since the start of the Obama presidency, relations between the United States and Israel have reached historic lows. So has pretty much everything else except the unemployment level, which is currently nearing Depression-era levels. This year alone has produced a litany of disasters so pronounced that even the secular media is wondering aloud if America is under some kind of a curse. Last weekend, terrorism returned to New York and the heart of American culture, Times Square. Fortunately, the SUV rigged to be a bomb failed to detonate on a warm Saturday evening, with thousands of tourists crowding the theater district. Just last week, Tennessee was inundated with more than 2 feet of rain in 24 hours. News footage showed a house floating partially submerged in what looked like a raging river. It was actually floating down an interstate highway. A squall of tornadoes devastated parts of the region, injuring scores, causing millions in damage, and killing at least a dozen. And that's just the most recent round of flooding in the U.S. Conversely, the Ogallala Aquifer, which provides water and irrigates the Great Plains from South Dakota to Texas, has begun to dry up. In an article posted in the journal Nature, Dr. Kevin Mulligan, professor of economics and geography at Texas Tech University, says the Ogallala Aquifer will run out of water by 2030 at the latest. After that happens, Mulligan says the Great American Plains will become the Great American Desert. The fertile cotton and wheat farms that once supplied the world will return to the Dust Bowl days of the 19th